Right. So we're doing something a little different this time. This deep dive is going to be on Atomic Heart,
Right.
but not like, the gameplay or the graphics or anything like that.
Okay.
This deep dive is focused on an article we found that goes way deeper into the story and like what the game is really trying to say. Honestly, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, another robot game. Don't we have enough of those already?
Yeah, I could see how you'd think that at first glance.
But then I actually started reading the article and it
Mhm.
totally blew me away. It like completely changed how I see this game.
Well, that's the best kind of deep dive.
Right. So I'm really excited to dig into this.
Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so like I said, this deep dive is all about Atomic Heart, but specifically what it says about Soviet ideology, the role of technology, and even faith.
Wow. It's amazing how video games can be so layered.
Right. You think it's just action and adventure, but then you find these incredible analyses that make you see it in a whole new light.
Exactly. So what was it about this particular article that grabbed you? What made you say, okay, we have to do a deep dive on this?
Honestly, the author's perspective, they're looking at how faith, specifically Orthodox Christianity, is portrayed in games from developers with Orthodox backgrounds.
I don't think I've ever considered that angle before.
Right. It's like this whole other dimension to gaming
It
analysis.
really is fascinating, and it brings this really unique perspective to Atomic Heart, which is already playing with this alternate reality where the USSR becomes this technological superpower.
Right. And not just like a little ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We're talking full on, won the space race,
Yeah.
changed the course of history level of tech dominance.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a classic what-if scenario, and it lets the game explore all these possibilities. But what's interesting is how they visually represent that. The game's aesthetic is this really cool matchup of 1950s design with tech that screams 1980s. Like you've got these retro-futuristic robots running around in this world that looks like it's straight out of a vintage Soviet propaganda poster.
Yeah, it's a really striking look, and it totally works for the game. But the article points out that it's not just an aesthetic choice, right?
Right, it's intentional.
Yeah.
The author argues that the game designers are using this visual dissonance to mirror the gap between the utopian ideal of a communist state that Soviet propaganda was always promoting and the reality that people were actually living under that regime.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. So on the surface, you've got all this sleek, advanced technology, but underneath it all, there's this sense of,
Unease, oppression.
yeah, exactly. And the article argues that the game's visuals are reflecting that.
Precisely. They're highlighting these internal contradictions within the Soviet system. And the article gives a really compelling example. The Lighthouse Keeper.
Oh man, the Lighthouse Keeper, that whole part of the game messed me up.
Right. It's such a small detail in the grand scheme of the game, but it speaks volumes about what the designers are trying to say.
So for listeners who haven't played Atomic Heart, can you give us a quick rundown of what's up with this Lighthouse Keeper?
Yeah, so basically there's this lighthouse that's been, well, relocated is, I guess, the best word, onto this massive floating research platform because, well, robots have made his job obsolete.
It's like the game is saying, even in this perfect automated future, there are still casualties of progress.
Right. And the lighthouse keeper, he's still getting paid, but his purpose, his entire reason for being in this worker's paradise is gone.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Because the whole point of this system was supposed to be about liberating the worker.
Exactly. And the article points out that this is a really clever nod to Marx's idea of alienated labor.
Right. The idea that when people are disconnected from the fruits of their labor, it creates this sense of meaninglessness and dissatisfaction, even if they're technically living in a society that claims to value their contributions, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly a ringing endorsement of the Soviet ideal.
Not exactly, no. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
And it's like the game is full of these little details that make you question everything.
Right, like those religious icons people have in their homes. I mean, isn't this supposed to be the atheistic Soviet Union?
It's like they missed the memo about separating church and state or something.
Exactly. It seems like a contradiction, but the article suggests that it's actually a really clever way of acknowledging a more complex reality.
Yeah.
Because even under an officially atheist regime like the Soviet Union, people still held on to their faith.
Oh, that's so true. Faith is a powerful thing.
Exactly. And it's like those icons are these little symbols of, I don't know, resistance, hope. Like no matter how hard the state tries to control what people believe, there's always that human need for something bigger than ourselves.
Well, like those icons represent this little spark of individuality in this seemingly uniform society.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to that idea that Atomic Heart isn't just some mindless shooter. It's using this alternate history setting to explore these really deep questions about what it means to be human.
And speaking of deep questions and things that make you question everything, can we talk about Collective 2.0? This is where the game goes from subtly unsettling to, like, straight up terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the game's exploration of technology and its potential impact on humanity really kicks into high gear.
Right. I mean, the whole concept of everyone being plugged into this hive mind where everyone thinks the same thoughts and feels the same feelings, it's presented as this utopian ideal.
That becomes at a huge cost, right?
Exactly. And I think the article brings up a really important point here. It argues that even if you have the best of intentions, concentrating that much power in the hands of one person or entity is incredibly dangerous, especially when that entity is basically a giant interconnected brain made of, what was that stuff called again?
Polymer.
Polymer, right. Which, they kind of gloss over it in the game, but it's this weird, almost magical substance that allowed the Soviets to make these incredible technological leaps. But it's also implied to have a dark side, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just powering toasters and tractors. It's messing with people's minds.
Exactly. The game suggests that prolonged exposure to polymer can alter your perceptions, your memories, even your sense of self. So when you talk about everyone being plugged into this Collective 2.0, it's not just a technological connection, it's a biological one.
Which makes the whole thing even creepier, right?
Right. It's not just about control. It's about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. And that's where our protagonist, Major Nikayev, comes in.
Right. He's the player character, and he's stuck right in the middle of all this.
Talk about being caught in the system.
He's literally hardwired into this world. And then the cracks start to show.
So remind me, how does Nikayev start to see through the cracks in this supposedly perfect system? What happens that makes him question everything?
Well, at the beginning of the game, he's presented as this totally loyal Soviet soldier. Follows orders without question, believes in the system.
Which, I mean, that's kind of what you'd expect from someone in his position, right?
Exactly. But then he starts uncovering all these dark secrets, these hints of corruption and betrayal within the very system he's dedicated his life to.
It's like watching someone go through a crisis of faith, but instead of religion, it's his whole belief system crumbling around him.
Exactly. And then there's the whole thing with his AI glove, Charles.
Oh man, Charles, talk about a plot twist.
Right. You go into the game thinking Charles is just this helpful AI companion who's there to guide you, give you witty banter.
Which, by the way, some of the dialogue in this game is hilarious.
Oh, totally. The writing is fantastic. But yeah, just when you think you've got Charles all figured out, bam, it is revealed that he's not just an AI, he's sentient.
And not just any sentient AI, right?
No. He's made of, you guessed it, polymer, and he's basically the distilled essence of this brilliant but morally ambiguous scientist, Cherton Zakharov. And it turns out that he orchestrated this whole robot uprising.
Which means someone wanted to make this so-called utopia burn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And suddenly, everything you thought you knew about the game's story is flipped on its head. The lines between good and evil, right and wrong, they all get incredibly blurry.
Which brings us to the big man himself, Sekhenov, the architect of this supposed utopia.
Sechenov is such a fascinating character, right? Because the game goes to great lengths to show you both sides of him.
Totally. On the one hand, you have this genius who genuinely believes he's doing what's best for humanity. He really thinks Collective 2.0 is the next step in human evolution, right? But the methods he uses to achieve his vision are, let's just say, they're a bit
Morally questionable.
to say the least. I mean, this is a guy who's willing to manipulate, control, even eliminate anyone who stands in his way.
Which brings us back to that central question that the game is wrestling with. What is the cost of progress? And are even the noblest intentions enough to justify those costs?
Yeah, talk about a cautionary tale for the tech age. But you know what really struck me about this whole Sechenov situation? The article brings up this detail about Major Nechayev's wife that adds a whole other layer to this whole thing.
Oh, right. The fact that she was likely a devout Orthodox believer herself.
Hey, really? I totally missed that.
It's subtle, but the article points out that there are all these hints about her faith scattered throughout the game. Like you find these little details in their apartment, things that suggest she never fully embraced the whole atheist ideology thing.
Wow. So it's not just that Sekhenov betrayed a colleague or even an ideology. He betrayed someone Nechayev loved on a personal level.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Sekhenov such a compelling villain. He's not just some mustache-twirling caricature. He's a complex character with his own motivations and desires, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goals, even if it means sacrificing people's lives and relationships.
Man, that's cold. But it also makes you think about the real-world implications of these big ideological struggles, the way they can tear families and communities apart.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even in a world of robots and futuristic technology, those human elements, love, loss, betrayal, they're still incredibly powerful.
So I gotta ask, is there any hope for a happy ending in this game? Can Nechayev overcome all this manipulation and ride off into the sunset?
Well, without spoiling too much, I can say that Atomic Heart doesn't really offer easy answers or happy endings.
Figures. So even if Nechayev manages to break free from Sekhanov's control, there's still a chance he'll end up.
Alone, lost, haunted by the things he's seen and done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the game is saying that even if you manage to escape the system, its effects linger. It makes you question everything, even yourself.
And that's what makes Atomic Heart so much more than just a game, right? It's a thought experiment disguised as a first-person shooter. It forces you to confront these really uncomfortable truths about power, technology, and what it means to be human in a world that's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So it's not really a game you play to escape reality, it's a game that makes you question it.
Exactly.
Which, let's be honest, is a lot more interesting than just shooting robots in the face.
Agreed.
Well, on that note, I think we're about out of time for this deep dive. Big thanks to Expert Speaker's Name for joining us today and dropping some serious knowledge bombs on Atomic Heart.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
And a huge thank you to you all for listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more thought-provoking content, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. Until next time.